My mother rejected me my whole life and favored my sister. But when I trusted her with my son, allergic to 10 foods, she poisoned him with forbidden cookies and nearly killed him. Now she's in a psychiatric ward and my family blames me for cutting contact. I'm 28 years old. I'm a single mom. And I need to tell this story because what happened with my mother basically forced me to choose between protecting my son or maintaining a relationship with my family. And there are still days when I wonder if I did the right thing, even though deep down I know there was no other option. My son, Ethan, is 5 years old, and he's allergic to literally 10 different things, like peanuts, eggs, dairy, soy, gluten, tree nuts, shellfish, sesame, mustard, and kiwi. I mean, basically everything that normal people eat without thinking can kill him. And I'm not exaggerating when I say kill him because we've already ended up in the hospital 3 times since we discovered his allergies when he was a year and a half old. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand why things got to this point. My dad died when I was 8 years old, a massive heart attack while driving home from work. And after that, my mother, Barbara, kind of broke inside, but not in the way you'd expect. Not with normal sadness, but with this terrible bitterness that she directed mainly at me. My younger sister, Melissa, was 6 when it happened, and somehow she became the perfect reminder of Dad, while I don't know, I guess I became the reminder of everything bad in her life. It was subtle at first. You know, little things like how Melissa always had new clothes for the start of school while I had to make do with last year's stuff. Or how her piano recitals were important family events, but my swimming competitions were too far or too early for my mother to attend. I grew up basically raising myself while watching my mother completely pour herself into Melissa. And don't get me wrong, I don't blame my sister because she was a kid too and didn't ask to be the favorite. But it hurts. You know? It hurts to see your mother light up when your sister enters the room and dim when you walk in. By the time I turned 18, I was so desperate to get out of that house that I took the first college scholarship offered to me, even though it meant going to study in another state. My mother didn't even help me pack, just told me she hoped I wouldn't ruin this opportunity like I ruined everything else. And Melissa cried when I left. But I think it was more because she was losing the only person who really listened to her than because she was going to miss me as a sister. College was like breathing for the first time in years. I didn't have to walk on eggshells in my own home or worry about not being enough for anyone. I met a guy, thought he was the love of my life. Spoiler, he wasn't. We got married right after graduating, and I had Ethan when I was 23. My mother came to the hospital when he was born but stayed for like 20 minutes. Said hospitals made her nervous since Dad died, which was a lie because she'd been perfectly fine at the hospital when Melissa broke her arm doing gymnastics 2 years earlier. Ethan's dad turned out to be a complete abusive asshole. Not physically at first, but emotionally it was hell. Always making me feel like I wasn't a good enough mother, that I was fat after pregnancy, that my milk wasn't enough for the baby, stuff like that. It took me 2 years to realize I was repeating the pattern from my childhood, accepting crumbs of love and thinking that's what I deserved. The divorce was horrible but necessary, and when Ethan was 2.5, I moved back to my hometown because I needed help and had no one else. That's when we discovered Ethan's allergies in the worst possible way. At a birthday party where he ate half a cupcake and we ended up in an ambulance while I held his swollen little hand, and he struggled to breathe. The doctors did all the tests and it turned out my baby was allergic to practically everything, and we had to completely change our life. I raised him vegan, not by ideological choice, but because it was literally the only safe way to feed him without constantly worrying that something would accidentally poison him. When I returned to town, my mother suddenly showed interest in being a grandmother, which surprised me but also gave me hope that maybe things could be different. Melissa still lived nearby, worked as a dental assistant, and was engaged to a guy who seemed decent, and for a while I thought maybe we could be a functional family. My mother started coming to my apartment every week, although she always had something to criticize about how I was raising Ethan. That he was too skinny. He wasn't. That he needed more discipline. He was 3 years old, for God's sake. That I was turning him into a weak child with so much protection because of his allergies. I tried to explain to her 1,000 times that it wasn't overprotection, that literally one mistake could kill him, but she always rolled her eyes and said that in her day kids ate everything and nobody died. Things got worse when my mother started being more controlling during her visits, reorganizing my kitchen because it was poorly organized, throwing away food that she said was spoiled even though it was perfectly fine, buying Ethan toys that I had explicitly said I didn't want him to have. I asked Melissa to talk to her, that maybe she would listen to her, But my sister just said Mom was trying to help and that I should be grateful. Grateful. Can you believe it? Like, I should be thankful that my mother invaded my space and questioned every decision I made as a mother. Everything exploded about 6 months ago when I had an emergency at work. My boss needed me to stay for an important presentation, and my regular babysitter was sick. My mother insisted she could watch Ethan for a few hours, that she was his grandmother, and it was time I trusted her. I was stupid, I know. But I was desperate, and thought that for once she could follow the simple instructions I left her. I wrote her a detailed list of what Ethan could and couldn't eat, left his food prepared and labeled in the refrigerator, and reminded her 3 times before leaving about his allergies. She waved me off like I was being dramatic, and I left with a knot in my stomach that I should have listened to. 3 hours later, I got a call from my mother screaming hysterically that Ethan couldn't breathe, and they had already called an ambulance. I ran out of the office without even telling anyone and drove to the hospital like a maniac, while my mother babbled on the phone something about some cookies she had given him because he looked hungry. When I got to the problem, Hospital Ethan was hooked up to machines, his little face swollen, almost unrecognizable, and the doctors told me he'd had a severe anaphylactic reaction. My mother was in the waiting room crying, and when she saw me, she started saying it wasn't her fault, that the cookies said natural on the package, and she thought that meant they were safe. I screamed at her like I'd never screamed at anyone in my life. I didn't care that there were other people around. I didn't care about anything except that my baby almost died because she couldn't follow a simple instruction. Melissa arrived about an hour later and immediately took Mom's side, saying it was an accident and that I was being too harsh. An accident? She had given cookies with nuts and eggs to a child she knew was allergic to both. It wasn't an accident. It was pure and simple negligence. But of course nobody else saw it that way. Ethan was in the hospital for 2 days, and my mother tried to visit, but I told security not to let her in. Melissa called me dramatic and over the top, but I didn't care. My son almost died, and I was supposed to forgive and forget like always. After that, I severely limited contact with my mother, only seeing her at family events and never leaving her alone with Ethan. I hired a professional babysitter, Linda, who had experience with children with severe allergies and who really understood the seriousness of the situation. My mother constantly complained that I didn't trust her, that I was punishing her for a mistake, that I was being cruel by denying her time with her only grandchild. Melissa constantly pressured me to get over what had happened. But how do you get over someone almost killing your child out of pure stubbornness? The last straw was 4 months ago, when I went to pick up Ethan early from a family gathering at Melissa's house. I arrived earlier than expected, and I heard my mother talking to my Aunt Carolyn in the backyard. They weren't exactly whispering, but they didn't know I was there either, and my mother was saying that Ethan was a burden. Yes, she used that exact word, to me, that I had spoiled him with my hippie vegan lifestyle, and that his allergies were probably psychological or my fault for not exposing him to normal food when he was a baby. She said, I was a terrible mother who was ruining my son, just like I had ruined my marriage and my relationship with my family. I stood there behind the door, feeling like someone had punched me in the stomach. And then Carolyn added that it was a shame. The only good granddaughter, referring to Melissa, hadn't had children yet while I had had a defective one. I went into the house, grabbed Ethan, who was playing in the living room, and left without saying a word. Melissa followed me to the car asking what was wrong, but I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head and left. That night I wrote my mother a long message, telling her I had heard everything, and that I didn't want to see her or anyone who thought my son was a burden ever again. I blocked her number, blocked Carolyn, and told Melissa that if she wanted to have a relationship with me, it had to be without mentioning our mother. Of course, my mother didn't accept it that easily. 2 weeks later, for Ethan's birthday, a huge box arrived at my apartment with expensive gifts, toys I knew I couldn't afford, brand name clothes, and at the bottom of the box was a note that said for my special grandson, and a box of the same damn cookies that almost killed him the first time. I don't know if it was on purpose or if she's really that disconnected from reality, but that box of cookies confirmed to me that I had made the right decision. I returned everything through Melissa, with a note saying we wouldn't accept anything from her and to respect my decision to have no contact. Things got worse when my mother started telling all the relatives, her version of the story, that I was an ungrateful daughter who was punishing her for loving her grandson too much, that I was using Ethan as a weapon to hurt her, that I had probably made up the allergies for attention. I started getting calls and messages from cousins and uncles I hadn't seen in years telling me I was a disgrace, that my father would be disappointed in me, that I was breaking my poor widowed mother's heart. I had to change my phone number and make all my social media private because the harassment, we wouldn't stop. Melissa tried to stay neutral, but I could see she was exhausted from being in the middle. She begged me to at least consider family therapy, that mom was willing to go if it meant being able to see Ethan again. But what's the point of therapy with someone who can't even admit they almost killed my child? With someone who calls him a burden behind his back? I told Melissa the only therapy I needed was to deal with the trauma of growing up with a mother who never loved me and who was now trying to repeat the pattern with my son. 2 months ago was a second cousin's wedding that I really wanted to go to because we had been close as kids. Melissa assured me mom wouldn't be there, that she had confirmed she had other plans that weekend. I should have known it was a trap, but I wanted to believe I could have some normalcy in my life. I arrived at the reception with Ethan. The ceremony was adults only, but the reception allowed children. And there was my mother. At the main table because of course she had convinced someone to change the seating. I turned around immediately to leave, but she caught up with me in the parking lot, crying and screaming that she just wanted to meet her grandson, that she had changed, that she understood about the allergies now and to please give her another chance. Ethan was scared, hiding behind my legs while this woman he didn't recognize screamed and cried. Other guests started coming out to see what was happening, and my mother had a complete breakdown right there in the parking lot, falling to her knees and saying she'd rather die than live without being able to see her grandson. It was so dramatic and manipulative, typical of her to make a scene so I'd look like the bad guy. Someone called 911 because they thought she was having a heart attack or something, and I left as the paramedics arrived because I wasn't going to subject Ethan to more of that circus. Melissa called me that night furious, saying mom had ended up in the hospital under psychiatric observation and that it was all my fault for being so cruel. I told her that mom's actions were her responsibility, not mine, and that if she needed mental help, maybe she should have sought it years ago, instead of taking it out on her daughters. It was the first time I really stood up for myself with Melissa, and I think it took her by surprise, because she was quiet for a long time before hanging up. Last week, I found out from a cousin that my mother was diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder after that incident at the wedding. Apparently, she had been having increasingly erratic episodes that the family had been ignoring or excusing as, "That's just Barbara." Now she's in an institution in another state getting treatment, and Melissa wants me to go visit her, says that maybe now that she has a diagnosis, I can better understand her behavior and forgive. But the thing is, a diagnosis doesn't erase years of emotional abuse. It doesn't erase the fact that she almost killed my son. It doesn't erase the horrible things she said about him. My therapist, yes, I got one for myself because it turns out growing up like that leaves you pretty fucked up, says it's okay to set boundaries and maintain them, that protecting Ethan is my priority, and that I don't owe forgiveness to anyone, not even my mother. But there are days when I feel like the worst daughter in the world. Days when Ethan asks me why he doesn't have a grandma like his friends at kindergarten, and I don't know what to tell him. I tell him that some families are different, and that the two of us are a complete family, but I know that someday I'll have to explain the whole truth to him. And I don't know how to do it without sounding bitter or resentful. Linda, the babysitter, has become more than an employee. She's like the mother figure I never had. You know, someone who really cares about Ethan's well-being and respects my decisions as a mother. And the other day, she told me, I'm the most dedicated mother she's ever met. And I started crying right there in my kitchen, because I don't remember the last time someone told me I was doing something right as a mother, or as a person in general. Melissa and I barely talk now. I think she's finally starting to see some of the dysfunctional dynamics I saw years ago, especially now that mom isn't around to maintain her narrative. She sent me a message a few days ago saying she was sorry, that she didn't know things had been so difficult for me when we were kids, but I don't know what to do with that apology. Part of me wants to get my sister back, but another part is so tired of all the family dysfunction that I just want to move on with my life. Ethan is thriving without the chaos. He started kindergarten this year, and his teacher completely understands his dietary needs. He has friends, he's happy, and I never have to worry about someone deliberately ignoring his allergies or making him feel like a burden. We've built our own little family with friends who really support us and neighbors who look out for us. The dad of one of Ethan's little friends is a chef, and he's always experimenting with allergen-free recipes, so Ethan can enjoy birthday parties like any other kid. Sometimes I wonder if my mother really understands what she lost. Not just a grandson, but the opportunity to break the cycle that someone probably started with her. Because yes, I understand that she must have her own trauma too, her own story of why she is the way she is. But at some point, you have to decide that you're not going to pass that pain on to the next generation. I made that decision the day I held Ethan for the first time, promising that he would never feel like he wasn't enough, that he would never be a burden, that he would always be loved exactly as he is, allergies and all. I don't know what will happen in the future. Maybe someday, when Ethan is older and can advocate for himself, when he can understand and manage his own allergies completely, I'll reconsider some kind of limited and supervised contact. Or maybe not. Maybe it's okay for some relationships to end, for some people not to be part of your life, even though they share your blood. The only thing I know for sure is that I would do it all over again to protect my son, and if that makes me a bad daughter, then I guess I'm a bad daughter. But I'm a good mother, and for now, that's enough.